Espionage is a high-stakes game where trust is currency, power is the prize, and everyone has to ante up. Knowing when to bluff is the key to winning, and going bust is the only way you can leave the table. The CIA has used people from all walks of life to gather information, from university students to news reporters, even suspected terrorists at Guantanamo Bay, who they trained as double agents before sending them back to their own country. National security is a vague notion. It's for the fearful, the proud, and the paranoid. For those who understand that accountability can be traded for instant results if the stakes are high enough and you have friends in the right places. The line between trusted asset and double agent is always blurred, and there's a long list of operatives who publicly admitted to spying for foreign governments since the end of World War II. Former CIA agent David Barnett was the first agent to be convicted of espionage when he pleaded guilty in 1980. He admitted to spying for the Russians and providing the names and personal information of 30 undercover CIA employees to the KGB. He was sentenced to 18 years in USP Lompoc, a high-security federal prison in California. CIA officer Harold Nicholson was charged with espionage in 1996 after agents arrested him on his way to Europe to deliver rolls of film containing top-secret information to members of Russian intelligence. In 1997, he was sentenced to 23 years, but continued to provide information to the Russians from prison and was sentenced to an additional 8 years. The most famous case of spying involves CIA counterintelligence official Aldrich Ames. Ames and his wife Rosario pleaded guilty to espionage in 1994 after they admitted to working with Soviet intelligence for the previous 10 years. They're believed to be responsible for the death of at least 9 undercover agents. Rosario was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months, and Aldrich was given a life sentence with no possibility of parole. William Colby lived much of his life in the shadows, making deals with people he could never fully trust because the stakes were far too high. What he may not have realized was that climbing the company ladder raised those stakes even higher, and his public and private life would be turned upside down. William Egan Colby entered military service during World War II after graduating from Princeton in 1943. He was commissioned into the U.S. Army before being recruited into the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. He was trained in parachuting, sabotage, and guerrilla warfare in preparation for undercover operations behind enemy lines. He served as an OSS field officer during World War II and parachuted into France to help resistance fighters sabotage German forces. During the Vietnam War, Colby became director of CORDS, short for Civil Operations and Revolutionary Development Support. He took over the program in 1968 from Robert Cromer, aka Blowtorch Bob, and it was the stepping stone to his very public and controversial career. The Phoenix program started in 1967 under the guise of neutralizing the communist threat posed by the Viet Cong, but it quickly became something else altogether. U.S. agents were accused of setting up a police state where no one seemed to know who was Viet Cong and who wasn't, and thousands of civilians were tortured and killed during night raids. The raids were carried out by provincial reconnaissance units who were funded, trained, and transported by the CIA and U.S. military.
The strength of family loyalties, the traditions of retribution, and the ruthlessness of the Vietnamese made this so. Gathering intelligence was often incidental. Brutality and assassination were time-honored ways of exacting revenge. It was part of Vietnam. It was part of Phoenix.
CIA had never taught brutal interrogation because it's counterproductive. I learned that in World War II. When the Nazis applied that kind of technique, all they got was either what they wanted to hear or the person died resisting them. And you're not going to get accurate information that way. Interrogation is a very subtle art. of bringing along the person until he begins to tell you more and more, and then confronting him with contradictions in what he told you, with what you know from another source. And then you gradually break him down and you learn what the real case is. But that is, beating on the soles of the feet or something doesn't help you at all in that process.
Collected by the CIA and other branches of intelligence created a dependence upon statistics. Increasingly, unrealistic quotas were set for numbers to be captured and killed.
The agency was lying in one case, and all these murders were going on in another case. And as my ideological house of cards was crumbling, Colby, as head of cords, came out to the province. And he sat there with his notebook saying, well, how many assassinations have we conducted? How many people have we arrested? How many firefights have we generated? How much this, that? And I looked at him and said, hey, you dumb blind son of a bitch. Why don't you open your eyes and see? Do you believe all these statistics that you're reading? Do you believe all of these things that you're saying? How can you not comprehend reality?
CIA was tolerant of torture in Vietnam. It also participated in it on occasion in some of the interrogation centers as a matter of policy. Of course, as a matter of policy, it had to deny it. In my own experience, and when I moved to Tay Ninh, I found the police chief there was using our safe house to carve up prisoners who didn't have family protection. I reported it in a discreet memo to Tom Polgar, the chief of station, and his response was to have me down for a cocktail party and quietly in the garden, a nice man, explained to me that he couldn't close the post down, it was too important. He couldn't get the man transferred because that would be interfering in Vietnamese affairs. So all he could think to do would be to transfer me, and he pointed out that that would seriously damage my career.
It's standard procedure for the CIA to deny involvement in controversial programs like Phoenix, but when the program was exposed and made public by journalist Seymour Hersh in 1969, Colby decided to be a lot more forthcoming than his CIA colleagues were comfortable with. Congressional hearings were held in the fall of 1971, and the CIA took center stage, but not Director Richard Helms. He defended the agency publicly and only testified behind closed doors. It was Colby who sat in front of the panel and took the heat, and not only for the Phoenix program. Colby claimed that more than 20,000 people had been killed since he took over as head of operations, and 2 Republican senators added that the agency was operating in violation of the Geneva Convention. In 1971, $400 million were spent on various unknown projects in Vietnam that were never reported to Congress. While $400 million may seem like a drop in the bucket, that's the equivalent of $3.2 billion today. Colby had no good answers as to where much of the $1.2 billion earmarked for his Vietnam operation went, and members of the House Government Operations Subcommittee questioned whether Congress had any knowledge of what the funds were being spent on. It was pointed out that the names of the members of the CIA Oversight Subcommittee were kept secret, so the questions would most likely never be answered. Colby's testimony left many of his colleagues questioning whether he was a true company man, and their fears worsened when he claimed that if he were made director, he would lift the veil of secrecy regarding CIA operations. But on September 4th, 1973, President Nixon named him as the agency's new director. In late 1974, reporter Seymour Hersh published another article exposing illegal CIA activities, and Colby was called to testify in front of the Church Commission, privately in May 1975 and publicly in September. His honest testimony alienated himself from the agency and the White House, and President Ford removed him as director in 1976, appointing George Herbert Walker Bush to replace him as director. That marked the end of Colby's career in government. He started a private law practice in D.C., gave lectures about ethics, and was outspoken about his belief that the CIA should be subject to strict congressional oversight. But his CIA story doesn't end there. A discovery at the bottom of Chesapeake Bay just 2 years later brought his name back into the halls of the agency and takes our story back to 1964. 36-year-old Russian intelligence officer Yuri Nasenko was given asylum in the United States after expressing his desire to defect from Russia. He first met with a CIA agent in 1962 at a disarmament conference in Geneva, Switzerland, and 4 subsequent meetings were held at a CIA safehouse there. Nasenko agreed to act as an agent in place, meaning he would remain a KGB agent with no official ties to the CIA, but would secretly report to them. The CIA's chief of counterintelligence, James Angleton, believed that Nasenko was being used by the KGB to infiltrate the agency, and his suspicions weren't unfounded. KGB officer Vitaly Golitsyn, who defected from Russia and was extradited to the United States in 1962, told Angleton that if the KGB wanted to infiltrate the agency, they'd send a man like Nasenko to do it, and because Angleton believed that Golitsyn was acting in good faith, he took his warning very seriously. Angleton believed Nasenko's story was too convenient and considered his inconsistent testimony during interrogations to be proof that he couldn't be trusted. Nasenko was held in a series of CIA safe houses from 1964 to 66 before being transferred to Camp Peary, a CIA training facility known as the Farm, where he was held in a custom-made cell. In March 1969, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered that Nasenko be released, claiming there was no evidence to support Angleton's suspicions that he was spying for the Russians. Not only was he released, he was paid $80,000 in compensation and put on the CIA payroll as a consultant. With official defector status and a job with the agency, Nasenko appeared free, but factions within the agency kept him under a long shadow. The surveillance didn't stop until after Colby became director and re-examined the Nasenko case file. He concluded that Yuri was a genuine defector and ordered Angleton and his counterintelligence agents to end all surveillance and harassment. That triggered an internal war with those who sided with Angleton, and he was replaced in 1975 by George Kalaris. Not only did Colby replace Angleton, he reassigned or retired many of Angleton's diehard supporters and restructured the counterintelligence division so that the office of the chief would operate as a normal management position and not as an autonomous division within the agency. If you're an outsider, those changes may seem reasonable, but coupled with Colby's testimony at the Church Commission hearings, the agency had enough of him, and he was out less than a year later. John Arthur Paisley officially joined the CIA in 1953 before retiring in 1974. He became the deputy director of the Office of Strategic Research and focused on Soviet military capabilities, weapons development, and provided high-level intelligence estimates. Though much of his work was based out of his office at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, if you needed intel on Soviet espionage operations, John was the man to ask. The suspicious circumstances of his death just 4 years after his retirement led to speculation that he was spying for the Russians, and the paranoia promoted during Angleton's reign as counterintelligence chief came flooding back. His body was found floating in the Chesapeake Bay, and because there were no signs of foul play found on his boat, local authorities concluded that the gunshot must have been self-inflicted, but every detail of the shooting and the aftermath suggests otherwise. Police Captain Paul Rappaport gave the following reasons for ruling out foul play. He claimed the weapon used was a 9mm handgun, and Paisley was known to keep one on his boat. But the gun was never recovered, and there were millions of handguns in circulation in 1978, and 9mm was a common caliber. He suggested that because the 2 weight belts were buckled from the front, that meant Paisley buckled them himself, which he would do with a gun to his head, and since there was no evidence of a shooting on board, why would there be any assumption the belts were buckled after the fact? He concluded by making a vague reference to a story made by someone that he never named that Paisley told him that he wanted to be buried at sea. If there's any truth to that, I have to assume that's not the type of burial that he was talking about. At no point did anyone question the fact that the entry wound was behind his left ear, and that Paisley was right-handed. Rappaport's public statements received even more scrutiny after reports emerged that Paisley had classified documents on his boat, and it was equipped with a high-powered transceiver that was far above the needs of the average sailor. CIA officials removed the documents from the boat before state police could access them, but they claimed that none of the material was classified. Outsiders speculated that the documents taken from Paisley's boat pertained to the top-secret Big Bird satellite program, after it was revealed that 13 of the 350 copies were missing, and though Paisley was officially retired, it was reported that a source within the agency believed he could get access to anything he wanted. If Paisley had been outed as a Russian mole, his death would be much easier to understand, and the Angleton-era paranoia would be seen in a whole new light. Investigative journalist and CIA insider Edward J. Epstein told a reporter that Colby believed Yuri Nisenko's story from the beginning and jumped at the chance to stop Angleton from investigating him. 3 months before Paisley's death, it was clear that the faction war between former CIA titans was alive and well. Angleton still believed that Colby was spying for the Russians, and former director Richard Helms backed his theory. Insiders believed that someone was going to get hurt, and they suggested it would be Colby. 18 years later, William Colby was found dead in the same body of water as his former colleague. A neighbor alerted authorities that he was missing after finding his door unlocked, a pile of dirty dishes in the sink, and a mess of papers in his office. William Colby's death was determined to be an accidental drowning. Was the fate of the two men linked, or were their deaths an incredible coincidence? The answer will likely forever remain on the water of the Chesapeake Bay. Let me know what you thought about the case, and always remember to be kind to one another.